Hello, welcome to my live stream. Hope you guys are having a good week. I'm continuing work on my little Treehopper princess. I did some posing last week and I'm liking it more and more. So I think what I'm going to do is now I'm going to focus on detailing, which is generally speaking my favorite part of the process. We're missing a little bug here. Let's turn on the bug. There we go. So she's holding this little bug, which is something I sculpted last year during the live stream. I think it's kind of cool. I just merged it together as one piece, but you know, you can always replace that with a more detailed version. So what I think I'm going to do is let's just start with simple stuff. I'm just adding little dots here to the headdress. I'm going to do this for a few minutes just until I get to the swing of things, and then I'll do something slightly more interesting. So basically I created several extractor brushes to make this a little bit faster. And now I'm just going through and using this single dot here to kind of fill in the spaces. How long does it take for both of them to get a 3D model? I'm not sure I understand the question. Both of who? Are you talking about the insect and the female character? Well, I've been working on this just during my live streams. Both of these models, the lady and the bug. So my live stream usually goes about 2 hours, and so I've been doing it for the past few months with a few breaks. So I mean, you know, when I'm really pushed to do a model quickly, and I've had to do that before, it depends on the model. Like sometimes I'll start off with scan data for like a client. Like there's this company called CDM in Australia, and they do these. I'm gonna pull up this website because it's worth taking a look at, and also they feature some of my stuff on it. But I'll give you a good example of. So this is one company that I do occasional work for as a freelancer. It's called CDM Studio Perth, and they're in Australia. And this is actually 3D printed life-size whale. So here's some of the things that I've done for them. This is a 3D print of one of my models, of a termite model. This is what it looks like in ZBrush. And this is also a 3D print of one of my models, an ant model, which is really cool. I've never seen them in person because I'm here in Europe and they're in Australia, and I haven't had a chance to, go to Australia yet. But they frequently contact me, and a lot of times if they're doing like a museum exhibit, they'll give me a whole slew of models. I think the first job I did for them, I had to do something like 15 or 16 models from scan data. There's a very short timeline. So a model like this, generally speaking, if I start with the scan data, I've got to kind of get it into a good shape within about four or 5 days. If I don't have the scan data, it takes a little bit longer, because what happens when you have scan data is that it kind of helps you deal with things like proportions. So I'll show you the actual scan data for that termite model, or the process. So if I go to projects and see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. So, for instance, I don't know if I had the scan data on this one. I think this one actually started with my own. I had a version of a termite that I had made before for another project, and I started with that. and then it turned it into the model that they needed. So that requires a lot of, excuse me for a sec, I turned my music down. So that one took, I had to basically match the specifications for the species and then pose it and then make it sure it's watertight and all that kind of stuff. So that usually takes about, I'd say about 5 working days depending, but it's usually stretched out because I'm also waiting for feedback from their scientists and all that kind of stuff. So let's see if I can find one that I had scan data for. Oh, this is another. This is actual real bug. It's a very strange looking bug, but this one was done from scratch. Let's see what the final one looked like. This is a springtail. They're kind of really goofy. Very, very tiny, tiny bugs. And this one was actually pretty difficult to get it to match because I only had 2D images to work with. It took a long time to actually get the shapes correct. It looks like a really simple model, and if I was just making it up, yeah, sure, that would be simple. But when you're trying to match an accurate, scientifically accurate version of it, can actually be pretty tricky. Let's see, I'll open up another one of these. This is from back in 2024. Oh yeah, here's an isopod. I've done a bunch of isopods. It's a lot of legs, a lot of duplication. Trying to find one where I actually have scan data though. Yeah, it's another springtail. Okay, so here's a good example. So this is a mite. So this is what the scan data looks like. So you can see it's all kind of twisted and gnarled and missing some limbs and stuff like that. And so I have to turn this into something that's actually symmetrical and posable, and which could take a while. So this is my finished version. I think it's almost finished version. You can see where this has got a lot of the dot kind of thing that I'm using on my Treehopper princess. And then we finally do like the posed version. And this one's even poly painted. So, on and up. It usually takes a while to get, feedback and to fix things to make sure it's right. But you can usually, I would say, take about 4 or 5 days, maybe 6, depending on the model. Hopefully that answers your question. So, but this guy has been taking, or this gal has been taking him. Well, like I said, I've only been doing it during the live stream, so it's But yeah, I had to do like something like 15 or 16 models. My first job I did for them, 15 or 16 models within the space of like, I think 3 months. That was rather intense because again, it's like you make the model, you submit the images, and then you get feedback on the things that you have to change. Just like, if you're in production for a Hollywood movie or something like that. But, it depends, it always depends on who you're working for. I've worked for some scientists where, I've asked for a particular model and I've worked on it and they say, that's great. Here's a couple changes and then it's over with. And I've done that also for like Hollywood studios where I've done a model and they're like, oh, that's great. But then, sometimes you have a scientist that is extremely picky about exactly where every single bump or tooth on the mandibles is located. And then also sometimes when you're working for like Hollywood, it's the same thing. They can get like really specific and you can end up spending an entire day on a single curve of a model. And that could be really challenging. A really cool project that I'm still working on, and this is sort of semi-personal project. I've been working with Mark Gabbana, who is a concept artist, and he's been around for a while. He worked on Star Wars Episode 2 and many other many other movies. And he did a while back. He did a project for the Gnomon Workshop on concept design, which is really worth checking out because it's very cool. Let me see if I can pull this up here. So some of you might recognize this. This is the concept that he did for the Gnomon Workshop. It's a really cool concept, and it is kind of insectoid. So I've been working with him on creating a 3D model of it. And he's actually done some of these drawings for me. I think hopefully if I ever get it done, it'd be kind of a fun thing to produce for the Gnomon Workshop, because I've actually recorded some of our sessions where he's giving me feedback, and it's really interesting. But he's definitely somebody that was like, every single line is critiqued on the model. Every single angle has to be absolutely and totally what he wants, because that's where he comes from as a concept artist. So you can't kind of just slap it together. Let me see if I can load the project here, because I think it's worth checking out. I've actually done the entire thing and then gone back and redone it because after getting some feedback from him. So I've gone through the model a couple times. The first version of it, actually, I did for one of the ZBrush betas, and it was okay. But it kind of missed the point of what he was trying to do. It was like I made it way too damaged and beaten up and all this kind of stuff. Let's see if I can find the old version. It's a big project, so I'll take a couple seconds to load. Or a couple minutes. Okay, so this is kind of the final version that I did, the first version that I did. And it's okay. It kind of captures the spirit of it. I was not crazy about it because it was very hard to actually, kind of pose or to get a good read on the whole thing. Let's see if we can get this done. It's kind of a confusing silhouette. But that was the first version. I didn't really like the final rendered, so I've gone back and I've redone it a few times. And so where I'm at right now, let me see, open up the latest version. Excuse me, sorry for the throat clearing. I'm going back and redoing a lot of the slicer and all that kind of stuff. So kind of streamlined it. Let me turn on live booleans. And go back and really paid attention to getting those curves and kind of stream, because it's less bulky. I think this version's less bulky, and I think it looks a little bit better. This is still kind of roughed out, so you can see it's a little bit wobbly because I've kind of redone a lot of the parts in dynamesh. The legs are kind of a difficult thing to sort out, but the idea that we have, so this is a block out, so that's why this is not very tight. It's very wobbly. It's kind of a dynamesh model, but the idea is that this can slide up and down on a track here, as well as rotate many directions. So it's come along. It's a ways to go, though. But you can see I'm using live booleans to make this because I made the first version I made, I worked really hard on it, and I realized that this part was too small. And so now I'm making sure that I have it absolutely right using the advantage of live booleans because it's non-destructive to make sure that it's that's actually the right size. And then of course there's some stuff I gotta add down here. So it's kind of cool. I'm enjoying it, but it's taking a little bit longer than I'd like. So I'm going to reload that Treehopper. My goal for the live streams for the next couple months is to finish all the projects that I started last year that I never finished. I have a whole bunch of them. I got a link spider. I got a beetle model that I started like a year or so ago that I ever finished. Technically, I still need to finish this little bug right here. I did kind of finish Arachnid Warrior, so that's kind of good, but there's a few that I still got to go back and finish. So I'm gonna try and do that. Like most of us, I have a problem with. It's always fun to start a project, and it's always harder. It gets increasingly harder to finish them. You kind of run out of steam after a while. I think it's also because towards the end of a project, your issues become more technical and less, artsy. And so I think a lot of us kind of like at that stage, we're like, oh, we don't want to deal with the technical stuff, UVs, retopology, exporting, importing, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's one of the reasons we lose steam and don't finish projects, if they're personal projects. I mean, the nice thing about working professionally is that a deadline is a deadline. You don't really have a choice. It's got to be done. This is why it's like, if you get frustrated with a lot of unfinished projects, find ways to give yourself deadlines. Maybe collaborate with somebody else, because their impatience can kind of sometimes spur you along. Or like I've done a number of projects as part of ZBrush beta, and that's also a really good way to force you to finish something, because again, it's a deadline. They want the project to be able to be used to promote ZBrush, and so if you do that, most of the time you can get things done. Did quite a bit last year, but I haven't really updated my portfolio website in a long time. I made an entire French cafe, largely in ZBrush, and some in Maya. And that took a long time. That was a lot of work. I haven't really shown it here in the live stream because, well, it's not really bug related, but I think eventually I'm going to go back and add some other projects that are non-bug related that I might start to use on my live stream here. Just to shake things up a little bit and do something different. It's good to have range. I mean, I was kind of promote the bug stuff because it's a nice way to have people remember you. They're like, oh yeah, that guy does the bug stuff, so we can call him when we need a bug. But I like to do other things as well. I'm a digital artist after all. So I like doing character work and environment stuff when I can. It's interesting. I was working on an environment project last night, just starting to block out this little town for a personal project. And I started by drawing out maps and that kind of thing. It's just like, I don't know, my brain just works in 3D. When I start working in 2D, I just get frustrated really quickly. I have to work with cubes and planes and columns and cylinders and stuff. That's just how my brain works. It was a lot faster when I switched over to 3D. Hey, nice to see you again. Hey, how's it going, Brazil? Glad you guys are joining me. I'm listening to Renaissance music today. I'm in a Renaissance music thing. I don't know why. I actually studied a bit of Renaissance music when I was in college, way back when. And I like it because Renaissance music, well, I love Baroque stuff, and I love Johann Sebastian Bach very much. But the nice thing about Renaissance music is before Bach came along, the rules of harmony were still a bit loosey-goosey. So, especially with early music, pre-Renaissance, late medieval or whatever you want to call it, they really did some wild stuff with the harmonies. It almost sounds modern sometimes. So it's kind of a cool thing to listen to, and sometimes it actually kind of sounds somewhat modern. I also studied a bit of Brazilian music in school, Villalobos, that kind of stuff. Not that I'm good at playing it, but it's fun to study. Someday I hope to go to Brazil. I almost went a few years ago, and then COVID happened. I was going to go on a bug shot workshop. We're going to go to the Amazon and look at the termite mounds. I was very excited to go, but it did not happen, so someday soon. Okay, so so I think I'm sufficiently warmed up. I don't want to spend the entire time doing dots because that's going to get boring. So let's take a look at what can we do for the head here. Well, we got some fixing to do on the head, that's for sure. So we can start with that. Oh, thanks. Well, like most ZBrush artists, I'm addicted to detail. I have a high tolerance for doing really repetitive tasks, which I guess is a good thing, because I like to throw on the music and veg out and sit there and draw dots all day long. It's something very satisfying when it comes all together, but it's not so much fun to watch. The thing about her head and her face is I want to be careful. I don't necessarily want to go crazy with detail because I like the smoothness of her skin and the contrast of the detail of the other parts. So I'm trying to hold back and doing a whole lot of detail on her skin. Let me see. Get this. Yeah, let me show you how I made that brush. It's very simple. It's just a standard brush that I quickly adapted. So there's two brushes that I'm using. There's one called the extractor, which I made. Whoops. Let me subdivide this. This brush right here, and then I have a single dot, which I can use to go in here and go fill in the parts. Obviously match the size a little bit better. So for this one, for the extractor, what I did is I just, made a patch, something like this. And then I turn off symmetry. And then I store history state. This is an important part. So I'm going to store the history state, and then I go into extractor, and drag rect is a good one. So do drag rect, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sample this part. So I'll press, and I increase my brush size, press G to turn into sampling mode, and then just drag out like this, and it's going to create an alpha based on that selection. And now I got this, right? And this is really great for any kind of detailing because you can see how quick it is to make a brush, and then you can repeat this all over the place. And then you can switch the stroke style to drag stamp. And what that means is that with drag stamp, the size is always going to be the same. If I have this set to drag rect, right, the problem is that depending on how far I drag, it may or may not be the right size. With drag stamp, it's always going to be the exact same size, and you can rotate it around like this. So that's why I like to use that stamp. And then for the other brush, for this single dot, this is really very simple. It's a standard brush set to Z sub using this alpha, fairly high Z intensity, and then I set the stroke type to drag dot so that it's always the same size, and that's it. So that's all there is to those two brushes. And then, you know, save this brush because it gets annoying to have to remake it all the time. You can make things tile in ZBrush. This is one of those things that I always forget about. So let me get a plane here. This is one of those features that's been around for a long time, and I always forget about it. So I'm going to turn off smooth and divide this so I have a decent number of, like 4 million points. And then let's set the extract dots like this. Bring down the Z intensity a bit, something like that, right? So if you go in here into brush, I think it's under samples. I can't remember where it is. La 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 la. Wrap mode. Here we go. Wrap mode. We have several different modes here, so let me get the right one. There we go. See? You can make it tile using this wrap mode, and then, you know, grab the alpha or use an extractor brush. But yeah, that's how you make tiling brushes or tiling surfaces in ZBrush. Let's do this real quick. I'm going to make it bigger. This is not going to be perfect, but you get the idea. It's one of those things, it's like I've known about it for a long time, and then I completely forgot about it. Then I was watching somebody in Z Summit and they demonstrated this. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot all about that. So what you could do now is you could do alpha, let me see, from mesh. Let's get a different brush here so I'm not screwing up my brush. I'll just do clay or something like that. Brush from mesh, and I should be able to have Alright, well, I had to fix the edge there, but that's the idea. I mean, it's a tiling brush, you know. So, hopefully that's helpful. neck real quick. Come on. Okay, now she's all look weird and twisty. Let's see. Bring in my reference here. Well, that's comes from Pinterest. So there's some AI stuff grabbed from Pinterest here, just because I grabbed things that I thought would be helpful. Some of the AI stuff is not great. That's not AI, that's the real thing. One other thing I love about living here in Europe, man, it's like there's sculpture everywhere. I mean, and it's all different styles too. You just walk down the street, you can find a really old church with some really cool stuff in it. And I've been doing a lot of scanning with the iPad. ZBrush for iPad has the ability to scan. And so it's been a lot of fun. I'm going to do a YouTube video as soon as I get a chance, showing some of the scanning stuff that I've been doing. Apologize, I have a child with the flu in the background. She's kind of coughing a bit. Poor baby. I'm going to try and dial in some of this neck here and make it look a little bit better. I always got my friend here. He's also helpful. I need to get the la 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 la. Kind of funny. My camera sometimes has this automatic focusing thing, and sometimes it focuses on that head rather than my head, which kind of freaks people out. Well, I can't really see the neck muscles on that thing. It's on the body, so. tendency to overdo the neck muscles, so I don't want to do that. And I don't want to give her an Adam's apple either. This is all distortion that happened when I posed her using Transpose Master last week, so it's kind of given that you have to go back and fix it. And of course, there's lots of unresolved issues back here. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with these guys right here. Still looking wobbly. Okay, well, that's a little bit better. I'll probably give her some kind of, she needs something, I think, around her neck, decoration, necklace kind of thing. And I had to figure out what I'm doing with these guys. And then I don't think this is supposed to be part of her anatomy. So some kind of necklace thing might kind of help to separate. I don't know. Because I have this issue right here. Trying to remember what I was thinking of this whole thing. I don't think I want that. I could always merge them together with dynamesh. Or do the old video game thing. When in doubt, give him a nice scarf. I worked on a preview for a video game a long time ago, like a trailer, back when we were still doing that with rendered trailers based on, it was for the video game Starhawk, which I don't know if anybody remembers. I never played it, but I worked on the trailer. It's so funny because you had this macho cowboy character, space cowboy guy, real badass walking around. But of course, back in those days, I think this is like early 2000s, there's still like, in order to hide the separation between the head and the body for video game characters, they were always using scarves. So all the video game characters had the scarves. So this really macho dude walking around with a little handkerchief around his neck. It's really funny. So, what to do? This is 3 million and this is 3 million. So I could probably merge these together and then do dynamesh and blend them together that way. Because I think otherwise I'm just going to be fighting this the whole time forever. Let's see. When in doubt, we can always clone them. So I'm going to clone this. Select this. We'll just do an experiment. Whenever I'm not sure how I'm going to do something, I usually make a clone of it and work on a separate tool. Just, you know, you don't have to do it. It's just sometimes it helps to clear the mind when you can just focus on something. You don't have to worry about all the other subtools and everything. I'm going to just mess with this a little bit. Bring these together. I'm going to kind of... This indecision's bugging me. The end goal for this project is to make something cool. It's just sort of a fun thing to do for the live stream. This I'm doing. I guess another way to put it is I'm having her posed because I'm just going to do it as a single render, or maybe a turntable. But it's not going to be animated. It's not a character that's going to be meant to be rigged or anything like that. It's just kind of a sculpture, but it's mostly just to do something fun in the live stream. But I don't think I'm going to rig her or anything like that. You know, if it's a character I decide I really like, maybe I'll think about doing that later. But I don't know. Yeah, I think the only way to resolve this is to merge it into one thing. Okay, so let's try it. Do a merge down. I might do it actually. Let's do this. Let's do merge visible, because that makes it as a separate subtool, and then I can just append that and then use projection or whatever. So now I'll append the merged version right here. So it's about 6 million, so that's not bad. And then I'm gonna store history at the moment, and then do see if I do this little too low res. There's 200,000. That's not bad. That's about 1 million. We've got all kinds of issues with the anatomy going on here. I mean, the reason I started doing this character is just because have done so many bugs recently for the live stream. I wanted to just scratch that character itch a little bit while still staying in the bug theme. Do something a bit different from what have been doing. She doesn't have an Adam's apple. Well, you know, I blocked out I don't know, depends on how much I won't know that I'm done until I'm done. But if you're talking about the sculpt phase in terms of just a block out, I'm pretty close. And then if you're talking about getting to the detailing phase, which is what I guess I would call the next phase. But, you know, I had this as an unposed sort of a posed version for a while, and it was getting a little bit stagnant because it's lacking personality because of the bland pose. So last week I spent some time with, or maybe it was a week before, Transpose Master, giving her a pose so that I could start to bring some personality and just something a bit more interest in here. And, you know, I got most of the symmetrical stuff out of the way, so it felt like it was okay to kind of go ahead and do that. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking all those parts that got distorted and mangled a little bit, like the neck. And I'm having obviously issues with the anatomy here that I'm trying to fix, and kind of fixing those up before I go back into detailing. But I think I'm pretty close, you know. I think I have all the elements that I want. Like I don't, you know, the only thing I think she might be missing is maybe a necklace, but I haven't really decided yet. Because, you know, necklace might just be a cop-out for me not wanting to fix the anatomy issues with her neck, because this could be tough. But, you know, without a necklace or something covering her neck, I think it could make her look a bit more elegant. But I don't know. So, you know, some of the detailing is really tedious, so I haven't been doing it in the live stream because it's kind of boring to watch me make dots for 2 hours, you know. So I'm kind of doing that a little bit here and there, but what I really need to do is find the time offline to do that stuff, because nobody wants me to watch me make dots for 2 hours. But overall, I think it's pretty close. So, okay, still got some neck issues, but that's okay. I'm going to leave it alone for now. Come back to it later. But at least I think now that's kind of resolved. I think this is kind of interesting, even though it's anatomically suspect. Now let's fill that in, see what happens. The concept of the character is she's like, you know, an emissary from some insectoid-like race, visiting Starship Enterprise or something like that. Next Generation Enterprise with Picard. Not this garbage that they have these days. Does anybody know, is there a name, you know, because like if you had the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, which is the Kelvin timeline, which they ruined, is there a name for the Next Generation, you know, Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise timeline or universe, up until before they do like Discovery and Strange New Worlds and all this stuff that I really can't stand. Problem is that timeline includes the Picard show, and Picard show is god awful, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm very opinionated when it comes to Star Trek. If I was going to do a necklace, I think I would do something kind of like along this motif that I started. Maybe like a choker or something. Now I'm wondering if that's not such a bad idea, because the neck is just, I'm fighting with the neck a lot. I have to break out some like Bridgman books or something and really look at the neck anatomy. Maybe I'm overdoing it, I don't know. But I would think like a choker or something like that. So what I'm going to do now is I have this merged, dynamesh, so I'm going to store this history and do a quick ZBrush. I'm not going to, you know, it's like at this point I'm not going to worry about the topology so much in terms of an animation topology. I just want something that has a decent edge flow that allows mixed sculpting easier. So it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be okay. So I'm going to go down to ZBrush. I'm going to turn on keep groups. Set this to half. Let's see how that goes. You have to go back and do some anatomy lessons. I'm rusty on my human anatomy, obviously. Here's what I'm doing. Make this its own polygroup, and then let's make this its own polygroup, and this polygroup. I see a noticeable decline in entertainment products in these recent years. Oh yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's a problem. It's, you know, I think it's, you know, there's lots of blame to go around for that kind of thing. I think it's just the fact that it's such a money-making thing that whenever you have people making lots of money off of it, less creative people get involved. And those less creative people tend to dilute the quality. And then you have larger teams and larger, I mean, think of it this way. When you go see a movie that has a lot of special effects, even a moderate amount of visual effects, it's still something like, could be 10, 15 studios working on those visual effects. And these studios are spread about in the entire world. Like when I worked at Bad Robot, and I worked on the Star Trek Beyond, so I feel perfectly confident saying that was a terrible movie. Or just not a great movie. we'd be working on some things in Bad Robot and get it up to a certain point and then ship it out to another company. It might be in Korea or Asia or wherever, and they would finish the shot and they might send it to another company in Canada, whatever. So you have all these companies all over the world working on this this project, and I don't know how you would ever maintain a certain amount of that creative spark or that creative spirit that you have in the older movies when you have everything spread out. And it's not just the fact that it's spread out. We're talking about spread out between different cultures, right? I mean, art is a cultural thing. All cultures have their own voice, which is a wonderful thing. But if you have all these companies and all these artists from all around the world working on the same project, it's going to tend to homogenize everything. I think a perfect example of that is The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker is not a Star Wars movie. I don't know what the hell it is. It's just a mishmash of Star Wars-like ideas slapped together for maximum profit, and there's nothing Star Wars about it, which is really unfortunate. And I think that's a perfect example of why you have this decline, is because, it's gotten so big and there's so much money involved and so many people involved that it just dilutes the quality. You compare it with Episode 4, the Star Wars original $10 million budget. They're slapping things together with scotch tape and everything, but there's that spirit, that spark, that innovation. I mean, a lot of people want to blame CG for the decline in quality. Obviously, I'm not going to do that because I'm a CG artist and I love doing CG. I like working on the computer. I don't think it's CG per se that causes the problem. I think it's the institution of filmmaking, which has gotten so big and it's become so much of an entertainment thing and maximize profits, and there's so much of it that it's really hard to have something that's really high quality. So that's my rant on the whole thing. And obviously we can blame other things like AI and other technologies. It really comes down, I don't like to blame the technology necessarily, again, because I'm not a Luddite, but also because it's too easy. It's too simple an excuse to say, oh, well, it's the CG that's ruined it all. No, it's the people making the decisions and how the CG is going to be used. It always comes down to the people making the decisions are the people to blame, and so if somebody is making a poor decision on how to use the CG, or they just don't care, or they're not an artist to begin with, then yeah, the CG is going to look crappy, and you're going to end up with a really unsatisfying result. I saw some YouTube channel that was going on to try and explain why CG looked so much better years ago than it does now. I tend to disagree with that, and I can cite Wild Wild West and how many other movies. Scorpion King's a classic CG nightmare. All these things are just terrible. It's just that some movies, CG is very expensive, and so the people making the decisions and how CG was used for those better movies made better decisions. Peter Jackson made better decisions. That was late 90s, his Lord of the Rings, and that stuff still holds up in a lot of ways. He made better decisions on how to use CG than, say, the people working on Scorpion King or Wild Wild West, Or if you look at like the Matrix, the first Matrix, the CG is amazing. Second Matrix, it starts to fall apart. What happened? It went to their head and they made bad decisions on how to use it. So that's my 4.5 cents. Okay, so let's do some projection here, see if we can bring some of that detail back. I mean, anybody who's worked in the trenches in CG in a studio knows this, because you've known when we have a really great art director or boss and we have a really terrible one, the difference is enormous. I mean, it's not even funny how much a difference it makes to have a good, reliable artist. And I've worked on, some jobs where my art director is somebody who's actually a ZBrush artist or a Maya artist or whatever artist. They've actually used the tools. And those jobs are usually really good because I know how to communicate with the art director and how to get the job done. And they also understand when things are in a kind of not great phase, how to fix it so it will look good. Whereas if you have somebody who's an art director or a client who has zero experience actually using the tools, that can be a nightmare because they don't understand what's going on when you're at a certain phase. Especially I have those people who are just like, please show an update of your work every single day. Well, I understand why somebody would want to see your work every single day to see where you're at. But if they don't understand the process, they might not understand why something looks the way it does, or it's not a finished product by the end of your third day on the job, you know. And I had this recently where somebody was just like, you know, gave me this very crappy model, that a very low quality, low polygon model, and they wanted me to texture it without changing the topology or the UVs and make it look like cinema quality even when it's close up. And that was horrible because the people making the decisions had never tried to do that themselves. They didn't know what's involved in that, especially when it's a single model and you have very low polygons here on this side and very dense polygons in the face because it's like a game model or something. They just bought it from somewhere and wanted us to turn it into a movie quality model. It's a freaking nightmare because of course it's going to look like crap. Garbage in, garbage out, you know what I mean? So because of that, it was a very difficult project. But again, it just comes down to who's making the decisions. And, you know, oh yeah, decision making is dollar fueled. Yeah, well, everybody's into money these days. It seems to be a very popular thing. You notice this? Okay, so here's the merged version. Wait, where's the merged version? There it is. I think that might have been a good idea to merge those in the long run. Because it's still only 6 million points, which is not too bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the stuff I don't need. Let's save this first. Always save before you delete a subtool, because you can't undo deleting a subtool. And it's amazing how many times I've deleted the wrong subtool and been like, oh man. I've recently been in that exact situation recently. Wonder if you worked for the same company. I'm not going to name any names. I had a really weird project where it's just like and the funniest thing is this project where I had to work on this model, and I'm not going to say what it was, but I had no idea what the end result was. Is this a movie, a game, a TV show? I don't know. They just gave me a bunch of stuff and said work on it. They didn't tell me the name of the project or anything. So I don't know if they ever finished it. I was just kind of like, all right, I'm going to move on to something else now. I did get the chance to work with Cesar Dacol Jr. recently, and that was awesome because he's old school ZBrush. He's been doing ZBrush since the earliest days of ZBrush. And so when you have somebody like that as a leader of the team, that's really cool because you're constantly learning stuff and they understand what you're going through. So that was a lot of fun. All right, what's going on here? Did I miss something? Oh. Uh-huh. Did I add the wrong object? I think I might have. I added the wrong tool here. Okay. There we go. Is that right? No. This one right here. Let's rename it so I know what it is. There we go. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I worked for a company long back. Have I ever been a director or plan on being one? I don't know. I mean, I have. I like working for small companies. One thing I know about being a 3D lead is you're the person who has to fix everybody else's problems, which could be less than fun. Also, being a director means you're in meetings all day long and you're often dealing with personalities of artists, believe it or not. You're not really working on ZBrush and stuff. You're walking around telling people what to do. That to me does not sound like a whole lot of fun. It's prestigious because it looks great on your resume and you might make some more money, but you're also probably the person working 7 days a week trying to fix everything and not getting a whole lot of time actually doing the art, which is the truth. It depends on the company and the project. Um, I have some of my own things that I'd love to turn into something that I could direct as a personal film or whatever, but that's a different thing. I think for a CEO of a company, maybe it's okay not to know what textile density is. I don't know, but an art director or any kind of uh, lead should obviously know. I worked with an art director one time, and she learned, this is way back when, this is a prologue, and she learned the term play blast, which is when you create a flip book in Maya. There's a sequence of images to preview the animation. And she started calling everything a play blast. Didn't matter if it was a final render or whatever, everything was a play blast. I used to crack up about that. It's like, what are you doing? Play blast? Get some weirdness going on here. That's some kind of weird artifact going on here. I don't know if that's... No, we could clean it up. Kind of little weird speckly things that happened, I guess, during the process of posing or something. Oh, it's not too hard to fix. What I'm going to do is just go down this low subdivision level and delete higher and then divide it again. Thanks, I'm glad you're liking the sculpt. I am too, now that she's finally out of the awkward teenage phase of sorting out problems. I think she's starting to look pretty cool. So I think I'm going to work on the arm here. I think, the cool thing about posing her is it breaks me from my reliance on symmetry. She's symmetrical enough, but now I can build some asymmetry into her, which make the sculpt look a little bit more interesting. I use symmetry as a crutch sometimes because it's faster, but my wife always gets on about me when things are too symmetrical. She said, it doesn't look natural. Of course she's right, but symmetry is fast. Oh no. Oh, that sounds horrible. Okay, so for those who can't read it, I was directing a small team, so I had to deal with the CEO, because after the art was made, he changed the game idea to open world and free roaming, not knowing about LODs and tech. That could be a problem, yeah. Nothing like changing the concept midstream. Keep you on your toes. Personally, I don't like it when, I like projects where they've pretty much worked out all the problems in the writing phase. I know it happens fairly frequently in movies, more than we want to admit, where some of the most important problems in the plot or the writing is something that somebody came up with halfway through the production, and you're like, is making up as he goes along. I always find that disappointing because maybe sometimes by accident it can work out, but a lot of times it's just like you can tell. I like it when I feel like all the issues. I mean, to me, the writing is the most important thing. When all those issues have been worked out and it feels natural, you can trust the writer and you can trust what the characters are doing. That to me, I like that much more than, hey, what if we decided to make everybody zombies halfway through? As a good example, I mean, I know that none of you have seen this movie. I know for a fact that you haven't. But one of the early productions I worked on when I was in Hollywood was Invasion with Nicole Kidman. This was like the 5th or 6th remake of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I know you haven't seen it because it was a terrible movie. I worked on the animation for the end title sequence, which actually looked really cool. And we even had critics saying it was better than the movie, which it was, because the movie was boring as hell. I mean, it's not saying much, but it's. But the thing is, the funny thing is the movie was the original director, got fired halfway through the movie, and I think they replaced it with the Wachowskis or whatever, something like that. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe the Wachowskis left or something. But you can, if you're watching the movie, you can see that exact point where the director gets fired, because the whole movie kind of shifts, and the character's like, "Oh well, I guess we solved that problem." Like, what the hell just happened? It's so annoying. Like the best tool that any artist has when it comes to like an entertainment project is Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Just write the stuff out, write everything down, because it always sounds good in your head until it's on paper or on screen in text form, and then you start to see the problems. And people will tolerate a lot when it comes to special effects and all that kind of stuff, but nobody likes bad writing. They even tolerate bad acting if the writing is really good, up to a point, obviously. And it's kind of interesting because we talk a lot about, or I've talked a lot about AI and all that kind of stuff because it's such a huge issue with regards to doing art, but it's also obviously a huge issue when it comes to writing. And so I did some experiments with some creative writing using AI, and you can pretty much see the flaws pretty quickly. The first time you write something, just write out a really quick situation, blah blah blah, with a couple characters, feed it to AI, and say, okay, turn this into a little novel or a script or something like that. And at first you're amazed, or at least I was, because this was early on. It's like, wow, I can't believe the AI was actually able to do that, to take these characters and add some dialogue and all this kind of other stuff. But then on reflection, as you go back and read it more and more, you start to see all the flaws, because a lot of these, I'm no AI expert, but basically what they're doing is they're looking at your text and figuring out what is the most likely next word or phrase in the sequence, and that's how they're building out the writing, your response. And it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly because the writing uses a lot of really bad cliches and a lot of like mistakes that early authors make or writers make. And it's like, it didn't take long for me to say, it's like, yeah, this is pretty much garbage. It's just not. Your characters are saying things that might seem clever at first, but then you read it's like, your character would never speak like that. That's not who the character is, And so it was an interesting experiment to see. You see a lot of the stuff online that's being generated by AI, and it's very generic. I think a really good example is somebody's been doing a trailer, like a fake Star Wars movie starring Ryan Gosling. And it looks really neat if you're like a super Star Wars fan, and you see, oh, it's got X-Wings, and it's got AT-ATs, and blah, blah, blah. And it's got Ryan Gosling. But Ryan Gosling looks really bored in every situation. He's not saying anything. He's not really acting. He's just sitting there in an X-Wing. And it's just like, everything about it is just so incredibly just just a spectacle of Star Wars goo, you know. Oh, AI slop is the best term for it. I love hard surface modeling. Should I also focus on character sculpting? Focus on what really excites you. Um, you know, this is a really good question. This is an excellent question, by the way. So I'm glad you asked it, because there is a problem where you're like, okay, well, I need to demonstrate a certain amount of range in my portfolio, not too much range, so I'm spread too thin, but enough range to show that I can do a number of different tasks and different styles. So what should I do? And it's a good idea to experiment with different stuff, but don't do it just for the sake of doing it. Make sure that, you know, when you're spending time and energy on something, it's very important to make sure that it is actually something that is inspiring you. I don't like modeling cars. I don't have a problem with cars or people who model cars. It's just, for me, it gets really tedious really, really quickly, and I had to sit there. I like organic modeling, which is the way I'm modeling right now. So sitting there and making sure that you have these cut lines and all this kind of stuff, it just doesn't appeal to me, so I don't do it. But I do like some kinds of hard surface modeling, like the tribal bot that I showed earlier. But I kind of do that in sort of an organic style. Anyways, sorry, I digress. What you should focus on right now is the thing that gives you a fire in your belly, because that's the only way you're going to get through all the way to the end. If you start saying, well, I really want to model like this hard surface stuff, this prop for a video game, but I feel like I should model a creature, do the hard surface stuff, work that out of your system first because you're inspired to do it. And then, if you really want to do some character stuff, do some character stuff. Like game props and that kind of stuff. The problem with character sculpting is, first of all, there's a lot of people who do it really, really well. So if you're starting out and you haven't done a lot of characters before, you have an awful lot to learn just to get up to an okay level. Even for me, I still have an awful lot to learn: anatomy, all these kinds of things, clothing, etc. Hairstyling. If you're doing female characters, you need to know something about maybe makeup or clothing or fashion or hair and all these things. And if those things don't excite you and get you interested, it's going to be hell trying to do it just for the sake of doing it. So if you are excited about doing some game prop stuff, just start there and see how it goes. Eventually, if you really want to get into doing some character stuff, that's fine, but just be aware, you want to keep that fire in your belly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So in terms of the question you asked, which is, are you a character artist? I'm actually more of a creature artist, as you can see, because my anatomy on my neck is terrible right now. I like doing the occasional character, but usually where my strongest, my strength is doing character modeling, or creature modeling, with an emphasis on doing insects and invertebrates, and also I do a lot of scientific modeling for scientists and museums and that kind of stuff. So I draw on a lot of that for what I'm learned from studying entomology and literally going out in the fields with a camera and taking pictures of bugs and that kind of stuff. That's where my strength really is. But I've been doing this since 1998 professionally. So I'm also a generalist, which is helpful because that means that I can find more work, hopefully, when things are slow. I actually did dynamics and that kind of stuff for a long time in Maya back before Houdini took over. And I did a lot of scientific visualization. And then around, mid-2000s or early 2000s, I switched over to doing more creature stuff because that's what I really enjoy doing, because it's still organic modeling. And I focused on insects because I realized insects are easier to rig than people. That was one reason. I like doing animation. Not the greatest animator in the world, but I enjoy doing it. So I found that bugs brought together a lot of things that I really enjoyed. I do organic modeling, but I also like kind of like robots and that kind of stuff. And bugs are kind of the combination of robots and organic modeling. So it brought together a whole bunch and of course there's also the science aspect, which I really enjoy. I worked on a project for Ed Wilson, who's the famous He's no longer with us, but he's a famous ant scientist, extremely famous ant scientist. And I read some of his books, and that got me really inspired. And that's where I realized that bugs brought together a lot of the things that I really loved about CG. And there wasn't a lot of people doing it, you know. There's not a lot of people who specialize and spend this much time on insects. There are some, and there's some that are better than me, but there's not a lot. So that means that I have less competition. Whereas if you're like a character artist, man, competition for doing character art is really stiff. There's a lot of people who do it and do it really, really well. So you can find a niche. It's always a balance. You know, there's always a balance between how much you want to specialize and how much, you know, you want to earn a living. The advantage of, you know, being a professional CG artist, the main advantage, and maybe the only advantage, is that it means you get to spend your day working in the software. So that means you get better at it and you get exposed to other artists and that kind of stuff, and so you learn better techniques. The disadvantage of being a professional CG artist is that a lot of times you have to work on stuff that you're not necessarily super excited about. I've done my fair amount of commercials and that kind of thing. To earn a living, and that's time away from really specializing. And it's harder and harder to be a professional character artist or that kind of thing. If you're a hobbyist, you have more time to focus on your own thing, and you can use whatever techniques you want or whatever combination of software you can get your hands on. If you're a professional artist and you're working in a studio, you can't say, oh, well, I use, you know, Prism for UVs, and I use Blender for this, and I use ZBrush for this, and I use Maya for this, and I use Houdini for this, and I use these 10 plugins, because chances are they're going to give you a workstation with ZBrush and maybe Maya on it and say, okay, this is what you get to use. That's what you have to use. If you don't know how to use those programs without relying on a whole bunch of custom plugins and scripts, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So, I don't know. So there's advantages and disadvantages, you know. I'm glad that you enjoy my CG, my creature modeling. Yeah, I didn't get to work on Prometheus. I did work on 10 Cloverfield Lane. That was one of my proudest projects that I got to work on, because I got to do the creature. Spoiler alert! I got to do the creature at the very end. I worked on a few creatures in there, as well as even some animation. But my main thing was the creature at the very, very end. And it was a cool project because it was such a small movie, you know. And I was at Bad Robot, and a really cool artist that I got to work with, and I got to focus on sculpting, and they also gave me a lot of creative freedom on that. But what was really fun was when I had the model almost done, and they had J.J. Abrams came around to inspect it. This is before J.J. Abrams ruined Star Wars, so. But it was kind of cool because he knew a little bit about how to use ZBrush and Maya and that kind of stuff. So he came over to my workstation and just looked at the model, turned it around in ZBrush and inspected it and said, perfect, awesome, it's done. So that was kind of nice. I did spend a lot of time on that model. So that was really cool. And then, I worked on Star Trek Beyond after that at Bad Robot. But then, unfortunately, as often happens in the industry, unpredictability, right after we finished working on Star Trek Beyond, they closed down the entire visual effects department at Bad Robot, which is known as Kelvin Optical. And that was really disheartening because I was so excited to be working in this small, cool studio in Santa Monica with all these cool people and doing really cool, interesting stuff. And then they closed the whole thing down, and I was back out on the street. Such is life in the industry. There's no guarantees in the industry, no matter how much, there's no point where you actually sit there and think you've made it. Maybe if you're standing on a stage with an Oscar in your hand, you can you can afford yourself the ability to say, hey, wow, I made it. But other than that, there's no point in your career where you're just like, this is it, I made it, I'm at the pinnacle, everything's good now, and everything's going to be great from now on. It doesn't exist. You can be on the top of the world in one day and then completely out on the street working on some lame commercial the next. It's happened to me where it's like, after I worked on A Bad Robot, on those movies, Star Trek Beyond was pretty good. It's a nice looking film. My biggest problem with the Kelvin timeline is I really don't like their version of Spock at all, and that's what really bothers me about it. But anyways, after that, I went over to work with my friends at Filmograph, and I've done a lot of work for them. That's why I worked on Wednesday with them, a lot of projects. And we did some really cool stuff. We worked on some end title animation sequences for various Marvel films and that kind of thing. But that was kind of short-lived, and then I was doing just regular freelance stuff for a while. And I definitely had these periods where I was just like, wow, I think I'm awesome and I made it and I'm Mr. CG. And then 2 months later, I'm like, I'm a complete failure. I haven't gone anywhere and my career is over and I'm doomed. It just goes up and down, And as you guys know, the industry is constantly changing. The software is constantly changing. Tools, we have to figure out how we have to figure out how we're going to deal with AI. We can't let the people who run the studios and then run the movies figure it out for us because they don't really care about us that much. So, I have very mixed feelings about AI. On the one hand, I'm not crazy about the fact that it's taking away so much of the creative control. On the other hand, I'm going to keep losing my polygroups. On the other hand, we have to learn how it works, because otherwise we're just going to be sitting at home watching other people work, Okay, what other software are you using in primary workflow? Primary software is good question. At the moment, I use ZBrush is my all-time favorite. That's what I like to use the most, obviously. I use Maya, however, and I just actually finished recording an Introduction to Maya series on the Gnomon Workshop, which hasn't been released yet. I have the old version up there for Maya 2023, but I just finished, literally last week, recording Introduction to Maya 2026 for the Gnomon Workshop. So that'll be coming out soon. So I use Maya a lot. I'm starting to integrate Blender into my workflow a little bit. I like to the only reason I say a little bit is I just haven't had the time to sit down and really go hardcore with it. And then one of my goals this year is to really actually finally learn how to use Houdini. I've used Houdini on and off for many years, but I'm starting to notice in some of my recent experiences studios is that Houdini is becoming, we always associate Houdini with explosions and fire and fluids. Well, it's now really an important tool for creatures because their hair system is probably the best. Hair grooming in Houdini seems to be the best solution. Like XGen in Maya is just god-awful. And I like Yeti for Maya, but again, you don't always have access to it. But after working at a studio recently, it became pretty clear to me. They were telling me it's like everybody's using Houdini for grooming and even rigging and animation and other character effects. So I want to finally jump on the Houdini bandwagon. It's funny, I took Houdini classes back in 2008 before they completely revamped the software. I was taking a class at the Gnomon School in Hollywood from X-Ray Halpern, who's a really great old school Houdini teacher. It was a lot of fun, but the minute I finished the class, they completely redesigned the program, and then I didn't have time to go back and learn the new tools. So every once in a while I stick my toe into Houdini, but now I really want to get into it. And then the other program that I want to learn more of, I've been using it for years, but not super extensively, is Unreal. And my wife is in the process of being certified as an Unreal artist. I'm very proud of her for doing that. Other software I use, Adobe Substance, obviously Photoshop. I do like Marmoset a lot. I haven't used it recently. I do minimal compositing, like After Effects. I used Nuke for a while, but I'm not really a compositor. Oh yeah, I've done a fair amount of 3D printing. I was just showing it earlier, actually. These examples of models that I've had printed. Now, I didn't actually print this, but I sculpted the model that was printed, so I think that counts pretty well. This guy is holding a 3D print of one of my bugs. And if you check out on my my website, I do have some examples of stuff I've done for 3D printing. I was, during the pandemic, I got involved in doing jewelry design with, come on, I can't. Here, let me show you my ArtStation page. I got involved in jewelry design with Thomas Wittelsbach, which was kind of fun. So a lot of these, this is actually printed and then cast into metal. So that's a good example of something that was 3D printed. And then this is another one. This is I'm really proud of. This is a Japanese giant hornet that I made into a pendant. So this is cast in sterling silver, but it was obviously, it was sculpted in ZBrush. These are renders done in like, what do you call it? Keyshot. But this is the actual 3D printed, which was then cast in silver. It's a really cool pendant. And I had a 3D printer when I was living in Los Angeles. I had to sell it because when I moved to Europe, because it's too much to pack. But this is a mantis ring that I did. So yeah, I've done some 3D printing. I have to get a new printer. This one's actually a good example of one really super challenging sculpt that I did. This sort of Valentine scorpion heart thing. But this was actually 3D printed. If I could scroll all the way down here and find it. There we go. This is what the 3D print of it looks like. It's never been cast into metal because it would probably cost thousands of dollars to do it. It's so big. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's really cool to see it in metal. And I have some of the rings, which every once in a while I wear. I haven't done any of the jewelry stuff in a long time just because I got sidetracked with other stuff. But I will say, if you're interested in 3D printing, there's a couple recommendations I can make. Because I know a lot about the sculpting side of things, but I'm not an expert when it comes to actual printing. Like I just had like a regular home printer. But I want to clue you guys into a really great YouTube channel for if you're interested in 3D printing. Vogue. This guy, Vogman. If you're into 3D printing, this is the guy you want to subscribe to on YouTube. He's awesome. Really funny, actually great videos, but he reviews all these different 3D printers and all this different technology. And he does really, really cool prints. Highly recommend his YouTube channel because his videos are actually entertaining to watch, which is rare. I need to get back here, but he knows, he's just got everything. He does a lot of printing for casting in metal as well. So I highly recommend checking out his stuff. The other person I would recommend is if you watch Thomas Wittelsbach's live stream here on the ZBrush channel. He does a lot of 3D printing. And oops, that's not how you type. What happened? Did my keyboard switch? My keyboard switched to France. Happens every once in a while. That's why everything's weird, acting weird. So check out his his live stream, because you can also ask him questions, a lot of questions that I can't answer in terms of 3D printing. I'm working on kind of a cool project right now for an entomologist who's obsessed with bees. We're doing this bee sculpture. It's going to be cast in bronze, and it's kind of like a bumblebee holding up like a giant grain of pollen, kind of like the famous Atlas sculpture. It's kind of neat. All right, now I'm just screwing around right here with this arm. I'm just kind of finding shapes while I talk here. When you do a lot of bugs, you start to kind of get an intuitive sense for insect shape language. The other goal I have for this year is to actually update my portfolio. I haven't posted anything new in a very long time, even though I've done a bunch of stuff. I haven't even posted the stuff I did for Wednesday, season 2. So I'll try and do that this year. Have you ever combined CAD and Sculpt? I generally, all the sculpt that I've done for printing has been almost entirely in ZBrush, which is possible. It's very organic, because you can use the 3D Print Hub plugin, which is really good. But I know a lot of jewelers use more CAD software in their stuff, and you can always, if you have something you've designed in CAD, bring it in as an FBX or an OBJ. Actually, you can use 3D Print Hub to import a whole bunch of different formats and work on it. ZBrush just depends, the topology has to be, you can't have n-gons and that kind of stuff, or ZBrush is gonna, and you can't bring in NURBS, obviously, and curves. But if it's polygon geometry and it's fairly neat, you can bring it into ZBrush. And I think the hardest thing about working for 3D print in ZBrush is making things watertight, because that just takes a lot of understanding of how to go in and fix those things. Especially if you do a lot of dynamesh and sculptures and that kind of thing. It's a great way to introduce errors, and a lot of times you're just mostly focused on finding those issues and resolving them so you can get a watertight sculpt. And you generally want to export something that's around not too much higher than 1,000,000 points. The reason being is like a 3D printer, this is advice from a few years ago. The technology's probably changed since then, but if you have a really dense, heavy model and you put it into your 3D printing software and your 3D printer crashes midway through the print, obviously you waste a lot of time and energy and materials. So you want to make sure that your model is not so dense that it's going to crash the software while you're printing. But when it comes to like combining things like CAD and ZBrush stuff, again, I would check out that guy Vogman, his channel, for specific advice on that. I think the best thing he has on there, he has a lot of great stuff, but the printer reviews are great. Before I buy my next printer, once I get around to it, I'm just going to spend a day watching his videos. And he updates all the time, so it's almost always current information. What I love to do is you can get like a home kit or setup for doing casting jewelry all the way from ZBrush to Final Cast. You can't, the main thing that the problem with it is to have a really highly detailed cast, you need a really expensive 3D printer. But you can also do a lot with sort of your regular, everyday prosumer 3D printer. You just have to understand the amount of detail. Like my little scorpion box that I made there, that was printed on a very high-end, like $40,000 printer. I didn't print it myself. My friend Tony printed it for me, Tony Rodriguez. So you just have to understand like what you can get away with when you're sculpting geometry. I mean, sculpting jewelry, but you can get some really cool stuff going. The problem that I had is that the people that do the mass production of jewelry, those companies are really flaky and really hard to deal with, and I just got sick of not getting answers to my questions, or them making mistakes with orders and customers getting pissed off, and I'm like, this is not really what I signed up for as a CG artist, So I haven't really done that much jewelry stuff since then. I wish there could be a company that could cast jewelry and be actually professional about it, and not so flaky. I have a very low tolerance for flaky people. I try not to flake out. By that I mean people who promise to do something and then don't follow through, come up with a bunch of excuses and all that kind of stuff. That kind of thing drives me crazy. So I have very little tolerance for it. And unfortunately, most of the world is full of flaky people, especially like in the entertainment industry. Okay, so I'm just kind of noodling around with some of this detail here. Let's see. Okay, the problem that I have is that I made this detail, but now I made her arm a little bit, kind of lost the femininity of it. It's a little too butch. So I'm going to go in here and maybe knock some of this back and shrink it down a little bit. I want her to look elegant. She's a princess, not somebody who does a whole lot of manual labor. So, in the risk of being slightly sexist, I'm going to shrink her biceps down. Biceps, this is obviously insect. It's interesting because insect muscles on the inside of their exoskeleton, they still behave very much like, in ways that are similar to our muscles. Just like our muscles always pull, they never push, right? So you have pairs of muscles. You have a bicep is pulling now, this is relaxing, right? And they're attached to my bone on the inside of my skin. Insect muscles are very similar. You have pairs of muscles and they always pull. They're just on the inside of the bone rather than on the outside of the bone. And so this can lead to, like you see I have a slight S curve right here. This is because we have these pivot points here where these muscles are attached to. Spiders, on the other hand, are interesting because they have more of a hydrostatic muscle system. They're using fluids to compress and extend their limbs, which is really interesting. That's why when spiders die, they shrivel up. It's very hard to get a good specimen of a spider that you can hang on your wall or frame because, unless you get like a molt. Even then, I have scorpions and blypages, but I don't have these spiders because it's very hard to get a decent spider mold. Maybe. It's really strange. I keep losing my polygroups and I don't know why. Maybe it's when I had my keyboard set to French. I was hitting some hotkey that was polygrouping everything. Might be it. There we go. Okay, that looks a bit better. She got big shoulder pads because she's a fan of the 80s. The age of shoulder pads. One of the things I like to do when I get to this phase, tighten things up a little bit, is to use clay polish. I'll show you what I mean. And just fix this line a little bit. Setting here. Just hit that. Kind of tightens everything up. A bit subtle this time. Let's see. Yeah, doing a lower subdivision level, you can see. Whenever I'm doing organic stuff, I like making lines that kind of fade and reemerge, kind of like, you know, in a ways it's a lot like sculpting cloth. So do a lot of smoothing. I'll draw a line and then smooth it so that it fades. Oh, okay. Oh, what was the most disgusting in a way of art thing that you've done? Maybe a collection of scary references or something, or everything beautiful in the art is artist for the artist. It's a good question, and I think you're going to be sorry that you asked. Oh, I have a couple questions here. I want to learn ZBrush. What are the essentials do I need to have to learn before learning it, and where can I learn it? Okay. Well, ZBrush live stream is a good place to start. Paul Gabry is your go-to man for everything ZBrush because he's been with the company for so long. He knows everything with the software. So I would check out his live stream. But if you go to the Maxon website, there is a learning center, and they have loads and loads of videos. And they also have a great YouTube channel that goes from everything from the very basics all the way up to more advanced topics. So I would start from the source. Go to Maxon. They invest a lot of time in their training. I mean, that's why they have live streamers like me. They spend a lot of time helping people learn their software. That's where I would start because you're getting the information directly from the source. And then I would also explore things like Gnomon Workshop. Madeline Spencer has a really great series on ZBrush that's very complete, so that's a good one to learn. But I think the best place to start is a Maxon YouTube channel, ZBrush channel, and there are learning centers which you can find on maxon.com or .net, I forget. Maxon 3D, whatever their website is. Next question, is it okay to change form like I do in Subdivision? Because baking errors, we do retopo again. So I won't do any retopo, actual animation retopo until the very end if I'm going to animate a model. But during the process of sculpting, I will frequently go to dynamesh, then ZRemesh, then dynamesh, and ZRemesh, and back and forth while I'm working out the model, like I did today, where I merged the head and her collar because I decided it was better to have them one piece. So I had them as a subdivision model with ZRemesh, but then I just cloned them, merged the two subtools, and they used dynamesh to fuse them together, and then did a ZRemesh so I could get a subdivision model. Even if the topology isn't great, it's good enough to sculpt with. There's a difference between sculpting subdivision topology and animation topology. Sculpting subdivision topology is helpful because, as you can see, I have levels of subdivision, so I can go to the lowest and to the highest, but it's not necessarily the greatest for like UVs and rigging, etc. But yeah, you can go back and forth between Sculptress and Dynamesh and ZRemesh as much as you need to. Think of it as a non-linear workflow. You're just using the tools to try and solve the problems that you're trying to solve. Okay, now for the most disgusting thing that I've done. Like I said, you're going to be sorry that you asked. The most disgusting thing I've done is I had to animate demo decks. Model and animate demo decks. Demo decks are these little tiny invertebrates that live in your eyelashes, and everybody has them, and they live in your eyelash, and I had to animate 2 demo decks. This was for a science museum movie about all the critters that live on your skin, so ticks and lice and all this kind of stuff. So I had to animate these 2 demo decks going into the follicle of an eyelash and making babies in your eyelashes. So that was pretty gross, and will give you nightmares. I do a lot of, and lice is no fun. I'm not a big fan. I've modeled a lot of flies, and flies still bother me, especially just regular house fly. I don't know why, they just bother me. Cockroaches, not so much. I've modeled a few cockroaches. Cockroaches, like the ones you find in the jungle, can actually be quite adorable. But I model spiders all day long, and they never gross me out. I always think spiders are beautiful. Same with my all-time favorite, which is the Amblipigid, otherwise known as the cave spider. Those things are just fantastic. I don't get grossed out by bugs or creatures or animals. What I'm not a big fan of, and what I don't want to do, is have to model things like zombies. I don't want to have to spend all day long looking at reference imagery of people with gunshot wounds, or people in the ER, or people in hospitals, or people with horrible diseases. That's not something that's really my big thing. So that's why I don't tend to do a lot of like zombie stuff. Because if you're working in a production, like a movie, and you're doing that kind of thing, you're gonna have to look at some really gross stuff for a reference, and hopefully you can build up a desensitize yourself to it, but at the same time, I had a friend who's an amazing artist, and I took drawing classes from him at Gnomon, and let me show you his stuff so you can believe me when I say he's amazing. I don't know if you guys know Kevin Llewellyn. This is some of his artwork. He does this stuff with pencil, right? So this is his. So I took some drawing classes with him, and let me tell you, sitting next to somebody who can draw with a graphite pencil and eraser and have it look like that is really terrifying. But he told me that, when he was going to art school, he was actually had a girlfriend who worked in a morgue, and she would let him go into the morgue and spend all night just drawing dead bodies. I don't know if I could do that. I think that ZBrush is unique enough that if you wanted to learn, just focus on ZBrush without having to worry about Maya or Blender or blah, blah, blah. You can do that. You can do an awful lot with ZBrush just focusing on understanding how ZBrush works. You don't necessarily have to learn Python programming or all the ins and outs of topology and all that kind of stuff. You can start with ZBrush just learning how to sculpt and to make things. And then what I always say is, like, you want to add your skill set. You want to start from a place of comfort with 5 or 6 things that you can focus on, and then as you build, add more and more skills to that skill set. So maybe you want to, like an exercise I used to have my students do all the time, be like, start your day, set a timer on your phone, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, right? Set it for 25, 30 minutes, put it next to ZBrush, start up ZBrush, take a cube, subdivide it, and sculpt a human head, and see how far you can get within 30 minutes sculpting a human head. And at the end of the 30 minutes, when that timer goes off, delete the project, don't look at it again, move on to something else. But if you do that every single day, your first 100 heads are going to look terrible. That's just the way it is. Doesn't matter if you're drawing or ZBrush or whatever. That's just learning art. It's the same thing with learning a musical instrument, same thing with learning a language, whatever. You have to reinforce. Learning is always about reinforcing those connections in your brain, strengthening the connections between neurons so that it becomes more and more natural. Like, I don't have to think when I ZBrush now most of the time. I can just see. That's why I like ZBrush so much. I could just zone out. But it didn't start that way. I had to spend a lot of time practicing, learning it over and over again, learning the program over and over again. You don't have to learn everything about the program. It's too big for that. There are parts of ZBrush that I hardly ever use. I'm not super great at ZBrush hard surface modeling like Paul Gabriel is. I'm much better, more comfortable with the organic stuff, and that's true for most ZBrush artists. But just start there. Start with the 5 or 6 skills and do it every day for 30 minutes a day. If you do ZBrush for 15 minutes a day every day for a month, that you'll get much more out of it than if you do ZBrush, spend a weekend on ZBrush, like sculpting for 8 hours straight. Because you sculpt for 8 hours straight, that's wonderful, but 3 days later you forget everything that you learned. Whereas if you do 20 minutes a day, every single day, you'll get better, much faster. So that's sort of my lecture on that. I don't think you like you could really you could go a long way just focusing on ZBrush for a few months and not worrying about other software. You just don't get too wrapped up in what you see online with people doing super fancy stuff. Just focus on ZBrush. That's my advice in that respect. Because ZBrush is very different from other 3D programs. It's so different that sometimes people who've used to 3D programs that get into ZBrush have a harder time than people who just start with ZBrush as their first program. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to finish my live stream for today. Thanks for all the really great questions and great conversations. It doesn't look like we got very far with her, but we did. I fixed some issues with her neck. Starting to work on detailing the arm. I think the most of the sculpt is done, and so now I can spend the next some time just focusing on detailing, which I think should be a lot of fun. Then I'll do some poly painting to get her looking really nice. This is something I could probably bring in. I could render in Redshift right here in ZBrush, or maybe export to another program. I think her leg is a little... I had to figure this out. Anyways, that's for next week. So thanks again for joining me. See you same time next week. And for those who want to learn ZBrush, Nightbot has put in some links right here from maxon.net. That's a good place to start. Right there. So check that out.